So when you were younger, like who was president and like who was like the other candidate for president during the election?
Okay, I can answer that. The only thing is you were talking about religion when we stopped, and you asked if we were very religious,
Right.
and you got my answer on that, like we were not. But you know, my grandparents may have been, because my grandfather and his wife, I guess, or my grandmother, uh, on the tombstone there at the church says first charter members of New Franklin Christian Church. So they were the first charter members of the church. And I know they worked to help build the church. It started out as like an arbor where they had like some posts or a tree, and they put a cover over it with some bushes, limbs and stuff. They called it an arbor. That's where it got started. And they were the first charter members. And their tombstones are like at the top of the hill facing the church, and so they may have been more religious than my father and our family.
And I heard were they like one of the founding families there of Lithonia, or where I don't know the name. I forgot the name of the city. I can't pronounce it.
Livonia?
Yeah.
Well, they were like probably leaders of they were the founders of the church. And but other than that, I really don't know the answer to that. But now you asked, the other question was who was president and stuff like that. Okay, I'd have to look and see. I was born in 32. I don't know who was the president in 1932, but I think it would probably be Franklin D. Roosevelt. Because I remember I was in grammar school when Franklin D. Roosevelt died, and the new president, who was the vice president, was Harry S. Truman. And I remember coming home from school and running down to the field where my dad was working in the field to tell him that Roosevelt died, because, you know, he didn't have a way of knowing. I don't know how we knew it in school. Maybe they announced it, but whatever. But it was on the radio. I don't know if we had a radio at that time, but anyway, Franklin D. Roosevelt was the president I remember. I don't remember the previous president to Franklin D.
I don't recall either. I think it might have been Hoover.
Probably Hoover. Probably Hoover. Herbert Hoover. Herbert Hoover. Because I remember there was a depression back when I was born, back in 32, and I heard people refer to the soil as Hoover dust. I don't know exactly how that came about, but I remember it being referred to as Hoover dust. It was probably Herbert Hoover. And because Franklin Roosevelt, I believe, was president for about 3 or 4 terms or something. I don't know.
Yeah, like 4 terms.
4 terms? Well, he was the president then. That's the one I remember.
And did the recession necessarily affect you guys?
What?
The Great Depression, did that affect you guys?
I don't really think so. I think it affected people that worked in jobs. So we lived off the farm, you know. We grew our food and everything, and nobody hardly had jobs. I know my dad he quit farming for a while there and had a job in a cotton mill. And I don't know what kind of job my sister had, but I know she had a job because I used to buy candy at a store and charge it to her.
Okay. And well, what else could I say? But yeah. How was like? Well, I know you were in the military.
I was in the military, yeah.
Oh, but like, what inspired you originally to join?
To join the military. Being homeless in Atlanta with no place to sleep, nothing to eat. I just walked out there on Ponce de Leon and joined the Army.
And like, like, what was the first thing you did like then, for the army?
And the Army? Okay, I joined in Atlanta here. I was in Atlanta in the summer, and I was looking for a job and I couldn't find a job. I didn't really have any place to stay, and I just said to heck with it. I'm going to join the Army because a couple of my buddies that I went to high school with had already joined the Army, and I figured, well, almost I wasn't really going to go back to school that coming September, and I would have been drafted if I hadn't joined. And I decided to just go ahead and join. And the first thing that happened to you when you join the Army is you get bused to the camp that you're going to be in. I was at Fort Jackson, South Carolina. They took us by bus from Atlanta to Fort Jackson, South Carolina, in the middle of the night, and it was cold, and we got there and in time to stand in line for breakfast, and I guess get assigned to wherever you were going to be and start basic training. So that was the first thing I did, was basic training.
And what year do you think this was?
1956.
So it would have been like around when the Korean War was happening?
Yeah. Probably around the finishing of the Korean War.
You were also stationed in Japan for a while too.
Yeah. I was stationed at Fort Jackson, South Carolina for my basic training. And from there, I went to Fort Devens, Massachusetts, right outside of Boston, and I studied cryptographic equipment repair and teletype repair. And so I worked on some cryptographic equipment, and after finishing that school, I also was in a little electronic school before that, and because I had a little electronic background, I had already been to Clemson a couple of years. And they sent me to Japan to work in a communications center that received all the messages from Korea and Vietnam, come through there, and from there on to Washington. And that's what I did. I worked in a communications center for 2 years at least.
And how long were you in the military?
3 years.
Okay. And when you were at Clemson, what did you study?
Electrical engineering.
Okay. And then I know we sort of skipped over this part in the story, but like, what first brought you to Atlanta?
I first came to Atlanta when I graduated from high school to get a job. I hitchhiked to Atlanta.
And was it on like the same highways that they have now, or was it like completely different back then?
That was different back then. We didn't have Interstate 85. The highway that came to Atlanta from Livonia was Highway 29. It's Old Lawrenceville Highway. When we came to Atlanta from Livonia, we would catch a bus if we weren't hitchhiking, and the bus would go to Athens, And then from Athens, it would either go through Lawrenceville and then to Atlanta, or it would either go to Monroe and then to Atlanta. And so I first came to Atlanta right out of high school to look for a job.
Were you successful? Were you able to at least start with a job? Or
Yeah, I got a job with Georgia Power Company. And I worked in the office downtown, right there, right in 5 Points downtown. And I worked on in a area where there were some ladies that worked on these key punch things. They punch cards and they put the cards in IBM machines and they would print out this and that. And I worked on a machine that would make copies. If we needed a copy of something, like one of the ladies would type up a big ledger of number of hours and what have you, I'd have to smooth this thing down, you know, with a fluid and put what is typed in color type on it and then roll a thing over it. And then I'd take a clear piece of paper and roll it over that to make a copy of it. We didn't have Xerox machines and ways of copying back in those days. Copying something was, making copies of things was like an ordeal. That's what I did mostly, except I ran some of the IBM machines. I'd take the cards and put them in the machine and run them through and then stack them up and do this, that with them. But that was my first job.
And I don't know where I heard this, but did you work at the Varsity at one point too?
Yeah, I worked there for a short while, yeah. I dipped some ice cream there. And every time I go there and get an ice cream, you know, I normally tell the person dipping the ice cream that I used to do that, you know, in 1950 or 51 maybe.
Yeah, it's crazy to think that's been around since then because I see the sign every time I drive into Atlanta.
I used to love the Varsity. I still love the Varsity. Man, you give me one of their hot dogs with chili and mustard and onions, and give me one of the what I used to drink. Oh, I was thinking it's not what I had to drink, but like now I get one of those hot dogs and onion rings. Delicious. I could eat that right now.
And what did your parents think of that, like when you went to Atlanta?
What did my parents think?
Or, well, your dad, I think in particular.
Well, he wanted to see me get a job and conquer life, I guess. He took me to Royston, which is 13 miles from Livonia, but he took me to Royston, dropped me off, and I hitchhiked to Atlanta.
Yeah, I imagine hitchhiking back then was safer than like now.
Oh yeah, we just had regular old highways, you know, just like a 2-lane highway. We didn't have any of these big 4-lane highways back then.
Because I have a friend that actually hitchhiked, like now, like, well, in August. He hitchhiked from here, or from North Carolina to Colorado.
Really?
I don't know how he did it, but he did it.
Well, I know how you did it. Oh, you mean just recently?
Yeah, like in August.
Uh-huh. I've often thought about how a person would hitchhike, or how I would hitchhike. Because I've hitchhiked from Atlanta to Cincinnati, because that's where my sister ended up working when she was an adult, full adult. I've hitchhiked from Atlanta to Cincinnati. And when I was in the Army, I was down in not Fort Jackson, but Fort Benning, Georgia, and they transferred me to Fort Devens, Massachusetts. I hitchhiked to Boston. And I know how I used to hitchhike. I would come into a town, and I had a map, I knew which highway number went to this next town and that way. And I would go to the side of town that the next town was on, and I'd go toward the destination and just find myself a place where there's some traffic going that way. Like if you were, going out of town, and that's the way you would go. And I'd find a place that they had a place to pull over and park to pick you up. If if they don't have a place to pull over and pick you up, they're gonna keep on going, And what I would do to get a ride was I would stand as close to the street as I could, and I'd put my thumb out like this, I'd look at them and they're like, I need a ride, And I see people hitchhiking now, they stand there and their thumbs like this, and, they're sitting down, they're leaning back and they got their thumb up and stuff like that. I would never pick up anybody like that. And also, I used to hitchhike. I hitchhiked from Clemson to Baltimore and back. And when I did my big long-term hitchhiking, I'd have a little piece of suitcase. I can't think of the name of it, but it's just like a little satchel that you put your clothes in. You had enough just for a few things.
Oh, a duffel bag?
Yeah, not a duffel bag, but something about this wide, and it comes up like a purse, and you hold it as
Oh, I don't know the name, but I think I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, but anyway, and I would put, like when I hitchhiked from Baltimore down here, I put a sign on that thing, and I put Georgia Tech on it. And people see me hitchhiking with a little bag that says Georgia Tech. They figured I was going to Georgia Tech, and I'm a college student. Things like that will make people stop, and try to dress nice. Because they don't want to pick up somebody that looks like a real rogue. And so I was quite successful in hitchhiking. But now I see, with all these interstates and everything, if I were going to hitchhike from here to Florida, it was kind of like against the law to hitchhike on an interstate. I'd get as far out of town as I could and get an on-ramp to an interstate and hitchhike on the on-ramp. Because, see, they can pull over and stop there. They can't pull over on the interstate and stop. So I'd get on an on-ramp and hitchhike as far as I can and get out. But the thing is, sometimes when people let you out, they're going to where they're going to go. And they may let you out in a place that's really hard to catch your ride, because there's no traffic there or whatever. But I used to do some hitchhiking.
You guys, when you were hitchhiked, were there any interesting conversations on those rides?
Yeah, there were some interesting conversations. I know one of my roommates, one of the guys I grew up with, we were roommates in Clemson. We hitchhiked to Baltimore on a Thanksgiving weekend. And we got picked up by a couple of guys by a guy and his girlfriend, and they were pretty rugged people. And we came by a car on the side of the road that had just caught on fire. And it was two black guys going hunting. They had their shotguns and everything. And we pulled over, or they pulled over, and to see if they could help or anything. And they ended up stealing the guy's guns, shotguns, two shotguns. They put them in the back seat, and we sit on them, and I thought, they took their guns, And they started leaving. Those black guys said, "Hey, you got our guns." And, "No, you don't have your guns, have you?" And they drove off, and I thought, man, that was pretty scary, And so anyway, that's just one of the incidences that happened And there was different kind of people that you'd catch rides with, and some were talkative, some were not.